Hey everybody, I'm JC from One Shot Adventures, and today I'm going to review another classic Old West horror adventure, The Forbidden God. An adventure that takes the PCs way out into the Utah salt flats, where they discover something, well, cursed and forbidden. Does this adventure still hold up after 25 years? Do you need some tips on how to run it like a professional sheriff? Well, if you do, put on your cowboy hat and get ready to ride, because here we go with my review of The Forbidden God. The Forbidden God was written way back when in 1998 by Tim Brown, and it was part of the original dime novel series of Deadlands adventures. That means it came in a little 64-page book where about half of the page count is dedicated to a short story that describes the adventure's events from the perspective of another group of people who came upon them before the PCs do. I kind of like this format, and it gave me as a GM some extra inspiration on how to better describe the adventure's settings and monsters. None of the backstory in this adventure is actually tied very deeply into the Deadlands universe, so if you're running another Old West horror game like Call of Cthulhu Down Darker Trails, you can pretty much just steal this adventure and run it without having to change very much. That's sort of what I did, and as a disclaimer, I ran Forbidden God with GURPS, not the classic Deadlands system or the newer Savage Worlds version. I think most of my thoughts about this adventure will still apply, but systems do make a difference on how adventures play out, so keep that in mind as I run through this. The Forbidden God kicks off with the PCs in Salt Lake City, where they notice that there are flyers everywhere in town advertising a brand new invention, Professor McClellan's amazing electric stage, a fully automated horseless coach that can take people from Salt Lake City across the Great Salt Flats and to the town of Hackensack. They can do that in just 6 hours, so it's pretty amazing. And somebody runs up to the PCs and thrusts a flyer into their hands, where they see that somebody's written a note on the flyer asking them to meet Professor McClellan himself at a nearby saloon. Later that day, Professor McClellan will explain to the PCs that he needs their help. He nervously tells them that while his business is booming and his invention is a great success, passengers have been strangely disappearing from the coach on the way between Salt Lake City and Hackensack. In fact, the last one showed up with nothing but a smear of blood on the seats. He's really nervous and has no idea what's happening, and he really needs the heroes to discreetly investigate what's going on in the salt flats before the town finds out and shuts down his business. I actually think this is a really cool setup for the adventure. It's got a little bit of steampunk elements with this horseless coach, and there's a mystery involved, and my players were just intrigued right away, and they were suspecting everything from like an outlaw posse to vampires or something outrageous like that being involved. Now, this does work best if you can come up with a reason that Professor McClellan reached out to the PCs versus anybody else in Salt Lake City. When I ran this, I just said that Professor McClellan was an old friend of one of the PCs, that they were in the Civil War together in the Army, and he naturally trusted that player to kind of do something discreet like this. But if you're playing this in a longer campaign, maybe the PC's reputation just reached Salt Lake City and the Professor, and he knows all about them enough to trust them with this mission. The heroes can either ride horses into the salt flats to go start this investigation, or they can take the electric stage themselves. Either way, Professor McClellan gives them an experimental lightning gun to protect them along the way. Are you giving me a lightning gun? This device is really cool because it's super powerful and is really deadly, but it requires the PCs to set it up in the salt with a tripod before using it. The salt's what gives both the gun and the stagecoach its power. And adding this weapon to the adventure added a really nice tactical element. Like the PCs were arguing about when to use it and who should keep after it, and all of them fought over who wanted to pull the trigger for the first time. It was just a really nice touch to the adventure. The ride into the salt flats is uneventful at first, and the adventure does a pretty good job of describing the weirdness of the electric coach if the PCs decide to ride it. A few hours into their trip, though, the electric stage just slowly comes to a halt in the middle of nowhere. And then the PCs see something entirely unexpected. An old and smashed Spanish galleon is just jutting up right out of the salt flats. My players totally did not see this coming. It wasn't outlaws or vampires. And they were immediately confused as to why this ship got here and how it even got there. And they were just mystified. Again, this adventure does a really nice job of adding a cool twist in the middle of the salt flats to intrigue the players. Okay, I have to say this is also the exact point that the adventure just starts to run off the rails. But before I get there, let me explain a little bit about this mysterious ship. This old galleon got here through a magical storm from centuries ago. Its captain was a Spanish conquistador, Captain de Velasco. His whole backstory is buried in a journal somewhere in this adventure, but the gist of it was that he started out as a brave and noble guy, but he got nastier and meaner through the course of his adventures, and finally he stole a golden bull from the Aztecs. He killed a slave on top of this bull, which caused an Aztec god, Cozatl, the forbidden god, to start whispering crazy things to him. A medicine woman named Poki figured out that Captain de Velasco was totally possessed and crazy, and she summoned magic to sweep his ship away in the middle of nowhere so that he couldn't hurt anybody anymore. But de Velasco survived through evil magic of this Aztec bull, and now he's this shambling undead corpse who just wants to kill people and offer their hearts to his forbidden god. So this is the answer to the mystery of who's killing Professor McClellan's passengers. It's an evil undead conquistador who's excited to kill people and sacrifice them to his dark god. Cool, right? Okay, so now that the players have found this ship, the adventure clearly wants them to venture inside its hull and discover its mysteries. There's even some gold doubloons scattered around the ship to lure them in. But before I talk about what's inside the ship, let me explain how your players are likely to derail this whole thing and not even get to the second half of the adventure the way it's intended. First of all, this ship is incredibly flammable. And remember, the PCs have a lightning gun. You know exactly what they're going to think.
Hey, little Johnny, this there ship look flammable to you?
Well, it sure does, boss.
Go get the lightning gun. Yeehaw! Lightning gun!
The obvious solution of just burning this ship down causes so many problems with this adventure. First of all, it destroys the only item in the entire adventure that gives the PCs any clue to what's going on. There's a journal from Captain de Velasco inside the ship. So when it goes up in flames, there's just literally nothing to tell the players what's happening here. Second, when the players burn the ship down, it's going to leave all this debris and stuff, which is going to cover up the tunnels that are underneath the ship where Captain de Velasco lives. So you'd have to dig through the debris to find the tunnels, but the players at this point won't even know that there's tunnels under the ship. So they'll probably just high-five each other for doing a great job with a lightning gun and then head back to town. And then once they're back in town, then you as a game master have to figure out, I need those killings to start up again, so a few days are going to pass, and then McClellan's going to be like, oh no, people are getting killed again, and then maybe the PCs will think to head back out into the salt flats. I mean, I guess if you're running this as an extended campaign, that might work because you could insert a little side adventure in town, and then suddenly the professor comes back and says, it didn't work, go back to the ship, what happened? But if you're running this as a one-shot adventure, heading back into town just kills the momentum of this adventure. You know, it's funny because the author clearly knew that burning down the ship was a real possibility because there's a whole section to it in the adventure, but other than mentioning how the undead swarms are going to just come out and charge the players, it just doesn't offer any solutions to the problems I just described. So when I ran this adventure, I decided that the ship was going to become weirdly inflammable. If the lightning gun ignited the ship, it would burn a little bit, but then the flames would turn blue and there'd be howling and weird supernatural sounds, and then it'd be quickly extinguished. But If I were to run it again, I think I'd do something a little bit more elegant. Like, I might just let the PCs burn the whole thing down, and then they're getting swarmed by all these fleeing zombie rats. But then I'd have the flames of the fire create like visions and illusions of the events that happened on the ship centuries ago. Like they'd see Captain de Velasco's like evil deeds and how he killed somebody on the bull, and then Pokey casting a spell that would create a storm. And then when the ship finally burst into flames, I'd have the debris explode and there'd be a sinkhole shaped like the Golden Bowl where there'd be the entrance to the cave system. Okay, clearly I've thought about this a lot, but my point is have some plans in place just in case your PCs decide to turn into pyromaniacs. The other potential problem that can happen at this point of the adventure is that your players, if they were like mine, just decided to stop, head back to town, and go get help to go destroy this ship once and for all. They knew that they were probably going to be outmatched by whatever's in that ship, and so they just decided to push the coach right around the ship and keep going, intending to come back with like the cavalry. And I guess this would have been fine. Like they could have rounded up some helpers and not everybody would have believed them, and then they could head back. And of course those cowboys would be red shirts, either killed off in horrible ways, or they could just be too afraid to go into the ship once they got there. But this solution just kind of, again, it takes away all the momentum from the adventure. Now, the adventure does have an undead bull roaming around the area, so when my players decided to chicken out and go back to town, I actually had this bull come like charging at their coach, and they tried to kill it, and they were firing the lightning gun at it, but they missed, and it slammed into the side of the coach and broke one of its wheels. And my PCs didn't really have any supplies or skills to repair the wheel, so they decided to head into the ship. That was a little clumsy, but it works okay. I'm glad that bull was there. The core of the problem here is that the adventure lacks urgency by the time the PCs find the ship. Once they see it, they're just not going to really be sure what to do with it. It's not clear how it's causing the killings that McClellan hired them to go investigate, and they don't have any context on it, so all plans from burning it down to running back to town to exploring it just seem equally viable. To fix this, I would add an NPC here. Maybe there's an old guy, barely alive, clinging to the top of one of the ship's masts. He's sunburned, he's dehydrated. He was one of McClellan's passengers that somehow survived the attack from De Velasco. And so now he's up on this mast and he's terrified to climb down because he saw his companions dragged out of the coach by undead conquistadors.
If you boys want backstory, you best come rescue me.
And so now the heroes can try rescuing him. And of course that's hard because there's, undead vermin on the ship and there's that bull running around. But when they do rescue this old fella, he's going to tell them more of the story about how he saw this powerful conquistador captain come out of the ship, and maybe even that he saw the conquistador captain possess one of his best friends. And then they came out later after they dragged the friends into the ship, and their bodies were desiccated and their hearts were ripped out. And once you add a victim here to explain more, now suddenly the PCs have a motivation for stopping this thing for good. Once you can get your players inside the ship, they'll discover that it's filled with undead monsters, like shambling rat swarms and rotting conquistadors and skeletal natives. And soon they'll discover that there are these tunnels underneath the ship, which are also filled with more undead minions. So you can tell here that this second half of the adventure is basically just a dungeon crawl, and it's a tough one at that. The way the labyrinth is shaped, there's only one entrance. So if your players are reckless, there's a pretty good chance that they're going to get bottlenecked and trapped by hordes of zombies and undead minions and totally wiped out. Especially since the adventure also discourages guns in here. The fighting in here is meant to be up close and hand to hand because the text mentions how bullets cause the ceiling to collapse and dust to come out of the walls that obscures vision.
Did you just tell me I can't use my lightning gun in here? What the f***?
To be honest, I mostly cut all of that part out because, hey, it's an Old West horror game. Yeah, it's supposed to be tough, but taking away the player's 6-shooters, that's just cruel. Dungeon crawls can be fun. I actually like running them, especially with virtual tabletop tools, but this one's honestly kind of bland. The chambers in the tunnels just aren't especially interesting. They're mostly just filled with undead minions. There's no puzzles or traps. The most interesting thing that the heroes can find is the ghost of the old medicine woman, Pokey, the woman that summoned the storm to take the ship here, and she can just basically tell them, go kill Captain De Velasco. But really, your players are just likely to go to room to room to room here, fighting zombies until they eventually find the captain and his golden bowl. The only real twist that these tunnels have is that Captain De Velasco has the supernatural ability to possess people. So he can actually possess one of the heroes, driving them insane, or worst case, causing them to turn traitor, try to kill their friends, and then run to the golden bowl and tear their own hearts out. I actually like that he can do this. This is kind of a cool, spooky ability, but I don't like the way the adventure handles it. You're supposed to draw a playing card each time the PCs enter a room, and on a face card, a possession happens, depending on the face card you drew. So a hero might just draw a bad card, go crazy, and then try to murder themselves, just all randomly. Oh, and the medicine woman Pokey, she can also possess people. And if that works, the PCs can also go crazy and try to rush the golden bowl to destroy it, and touching it will also kill them instantly. So really, a lot of weird, crazy possessions can happen that's totally out of the player's control here. But I kind of like what the author was going for here. I just modified this whole possession system a bit. It was just a little too much random chaos for me. In my version, when the PCs enter the tunnels, they see a glimpse of De Velasco out in the distance. He's far away, but he and his forbidden god are kind of speaking through them through whispers, and it's clear that they've been cursed for entering his lair. Now they know they're in trouble. And then as the PCs explored, I had them make like fright checks or will rolls or sanity rolls, whatever your system might do. And then I told them I'd be adding more and more penalties for the longer they stayed in these tunnels. So as time went on, they could get utterly possessed and turn traitor and go crazy, but it was not going to just happen randomly. It was going to happen over time. This worked much better, and it gave the players more urgency and more like emotional motivation to go kill De Velasco. And then for Pokey, the medicine woman, I just had the PCs literally hear whispers coming from one part of the cavern. And then when they find her desiccated corpse, she then tries to possess one of the PCs, but really only to better tell her story and explain more about the history of it and how it's an evil Aztec artifact and all about the evil forbidden god. And this added more texture to the caverns, gave the PCs more of an opportunity to find out more of the mystery and backstory here, and it worked great. Eventually, the PCs will corner Captain De Velasco somewhere in these tunnels and defeat him. He's a pretty good duelist, but let's be honest, he's not going to survive long against a posse of fully armed gunslingers. This is actually where I did introduce some of those rules about ceiling collapses and dust and debris, just as the PCs cornered De Velasco in his lair. I felt like adding the rules at that moment just gave Captain De Velasco a little bit more of a fighting chance against a bunch of heroes armed with shotguns. He lasted more than a turn or two at least. With Captain De Velasco defeated, the PCs will find themselves staring at his evil golden bowl, but any messing with it just kind of causes it to ignite on fire and burn the whole ship down. It's kind of like a classic Indiana Jones movie where the heroes are going to have to escape the burning ship just as the entire thing collapses around them. It's a pretty classic ending to this kind of adventure. So that's The Forbidden God. In the end, I think I liked the concept of this adventure way better than its execution. The premise of investigating a mystery in the Great Salt Flats was great. It felt spooky, and it definitely felt like an adventure that could only work in the Old West. But I just didn't like that it ended with a bland dungeon crawl without a real feeling of urgency. And those random possession mechanics can just devolve the whole thing into too much chaos. But the good news is that second half is just really customizable. Once I made some changes, I thought it was a really fun, well-paced Old West horror adventure, and I definitely run it again with my changes. But if I judged it purely as it's written, I'm not sure I'd recommend it to other game masters unless they were willing to put in a little work of their own. But maybe I'm wrong and some of you have played this one straight and had a blast. If you've played or run the Forbidden God, let me know how it went in the comments below. Oh, and if you're going to run this adventure over virtual tabletop, I posted a link in the description below with the virtual tabletop map that I made of the tunnels beneath the galleon. I also posted a version of Captain Dave Velasco's journal that was a little bit edited to be shorter because I thought the one in the adventure was just a little too long-winded for most players. Hopefully this helps you game masters. If you found this video helpful and you want to see more old school reviews like this one, don't forget to punch that like and subscribe button exactly like you'd punch an evil undead conquistador captain. Until next time, I'm JC, and just remember, if someone gives you a lightning gun, you best use it the first chance you get.
Lightning gun!